Okay, well, good morning, everyone. I am very happy to welcome you again to the second episode of this symposium. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. We tried to make it at 10 a.m., as civil as possible, but I know it's still early for a Saturday. So thank you very much for coming. I think yesterday we had quite an amazing introduction of lectures from ideas of sort of the river as metaphor, and sort of a slightly different understanding of nature to a certain nostalgia about modernity and the future with Back to the Future, and then with Graciela and certain sort of ideas about sort of the diversity of planning models and how those have sort of had very real consequences, like in the case of Ciudad Guyana and other experiments. And then I think it was followed by a fascinating overview of how I think South America as a continent has been sort of understood, mapped, and conceptualized through the lens of architecture and through the lens of the diverse disciplines affiliated to design. And I think that against that background is actually quite fascinating to begin to see today, I think, a series of presentations that are going to be much more focused on specific case studies. And I think that the dialogue between yesterday's sort of concepts and today's case studies, I think, is going to present an interesting counterpart for conversation. So with that, I'm going to give the microphone to Professor Anita Berrizbeitia from the Department of Landscape Architecture and a dear colleague of mine in the core urbanism studio. Anita, welcome.
¿Cómo prendo esto, Felipe? Felipe, ¿cómo prendo esto? ¿Cómo prendo esto?
Could we have Anita's image on the projection, please? I stay back forward el pointer, no?
Ah, okay.
Dog.
Okay. The network of cities that began to form in Latin America with the arrival of the Spanish in 1492 is well known for its extent from Patagonia to Northern California. For its form, a series of at least 911 cities of identical morphological origins, its adaptability, and by this I mean its capacity to expand or shrink as foreign markets shifted, its expediency, and its longevity. 16 of the 20 most populous cities in Latin America today had been founded by 1580. This network has been represented through time also with great consistency, each time giving us an image that captures our imagination. The consistency of the representation of the South American network is both its compelling quality and its problem. These representations allude to, but do not describe, but without describing the facts that these cities, as administrative centers of export economies, are a middle network that make the transactions between sites of production in the hinterland, or an inner network, and the outer abstract but very real global economic network that has, since the very beginning of colonization, provided the impetus and the raison d'être for the South, for the structure of the territorial structure of the South American continent. The reality is that the network of the South American cities and their concomitant productive sites is still serving uncritically the outer global economic network, and doing so with increased efficiencies in the current neoliberalist policies of most Latin American countries. It seems fine at the outset to speak of integration, connectivity, efficiencies, but we must also ask for the sake of what exactly. And if what we need are infrastructures that work at multiple scales, from the local social to the economic global, then we need to look more closely at the interface of the infrastructure with its territory, including how to reframe production according to internal needs rather than external economies exclusively, and in so doing, ultimately intervene in economic processes at a global scale, and therefore redraw literally the map that we always see. As Jorge said yesterday, this is best done by discussing the intersection of technology and politics. And for the design disciplines, this happens by exploring the interface between sites of extraction, their larger territorial and infrastructural networks, ecology, and society, which is the topic of our session. But I wanted, since rivers figured prominently yesterday, to give you my river image. And this is on a trip I took. At this point is the intersection of the Orinoco and the Ventuari rivers in the Venezuelan Amazon, literally in the middle of nowhere. And it is very hard for me to explain what one feels in the middle of when one sees the presence of that territory, because one gets a very palpable sense that there is a larger order that one cannot explain, not even, much less control. And the way to get there, on the way there, one also sees and gets a very palpable sense of a much greater order, and which was completely unexpected for me to feel this way as I was there. And I only show this because we're going to hear from Martin in a few minutes what he defines as a cosmic economy, and I am very curious about what that means, but an initial reading of it at least proposes this kind of intersection between this kind of material, territorial scale and the needs of global economic networks. So with that, I would like to introduce Eugenio Garcés, our first speaker, who is architect and professor at the Faculty of Architecture, Design, and Urban Studies in the Pontificia Universidad Católica in Chile. He is the author of the book Las ciudades del cobre, del campamento de montaña al hotel minero, como variaciones de la company town. And translated means the cities of copper, from from mining companies to mining hotels as variations of the company towns. Eugenio.
Good morning. First of all, I want to thank the invitation to this symposium, as well as to the persons who made it possible. Raúl Merotra, Felipe Correa, Ana Maria Duran, Victor Muñoz Sanz, at the Harvard University Graduate School of Design. I have to apologize myself for reading my presentation because my poor English doesn't allow me to improvise around the pictures. I'm going to show you a presentation with the title here, The Capricorn Axis, Territory and Mining Settlements in Northern of Chile during the 20th century. In this slide, we can see the structure of the presentation, which focus on the issues of the mining territories and the mining settlements. We will see how these issues are related to mining operations, transportation, energy, communications, cities and ports, forming the mining territory. These issues are associated with the IIRSA Capricorn axis. This is the issue I'm going to try to show you, and here comes the IIRSA Capricorn axis. Background. The mining industry has made significant contributions to Chile that go far beyond the strict boundaries of mining production. These contributions are linked with the first initiatives for the exploitations of mineral resources and the creations of mining company towns in the first quarter of the 20th century. Mining company towns were built to colonize areas with scarce population and limited productive alternatives, but rich mining resources, particularly in desert regions of northern Chile, Tarapacá, Antofagasta, and Atacama. The company town model evolved in the last decade of the 20th century into new ways of settlement under the form of mining village and hotel. The mining activities developed an occupation of the territory that reached various regional scales of action, which extended to a continental dimension for the exploitation of minerals and the connections with other productive sectors forming the mining territories. This process creates new configurations of the territorial organization based upon the transport infrastructure, energy, and communications. One, copper mining company towns in northern of Chile. The settlements in the copper mining divisions of the state-owned enterprise Codelco are based on the company town model. The company towns are settlements owned by one enterprise which integrates in a single urban form the industrial center, the housing units, and the urban facilities for the purpose of developing industrial production. This model was successfully adapted to mining, first by the nitrate and later by the copper industry, forming the mining settlements of Chuquicamata and El Salvador. Chuquicamata Copper Mining Company Town. Chuquicamata was founded in 1915 by the Chile Exploration Company, owned by the Guggenheim brothers. Chuquicamata was the largest mining settlement in Chile, with a population that exceeded 24,000 inhabitants by 1970. The settlement has three principal parts. The new camp here, we can see an aerial view, and with the plan, the new camp here, the hillside camp in this part of the slide, and the industrial plant here in the middle. The residential area reached an occupation of 205,000 square meters. Another 500,000 square meters were occupied by the camp facilities. The two camps included hotel, hospital, residential, villas, schools, urban facilities, and public spaces. On August 2007, the mining company town of Chuquicamata was shut down. Housing and other facilities for employees were built in the nearby city of Calama, 10 miles away. The enclave of Chuquicamata ended after 90 years. In the main picture here, we can see the new camp with the facilities, sport facilities, schools, etc. in the middle. To the right, some other facilities as the hospital, the school, drugstore, and the main square. Here some other views of the new camp with this housing, lineal housing blocks. El Salvador Copper Mining Company Town. El Salvador was founded in 1958 by the Andes Copper Mining Company. The company town was designed by U.S. architect Raymond Olson to meet residential functions, including 1,200 houses and urban facilities for 6,500 people in an area of 40,000 square meters. The architect incorporated concepts such as good living, health, and recreation. He organized the plan of half concentric rings. Here we can see the plan, half concentric rings, with a square as the focus of the composition. The rings are cut off by diagonals, and a central axis ends in the sports facilities here. During the construction, the stadium was built right here because of the topography in this part of the size. The triangular spaces, all these triangular spaces, were left as public spaces and urban facilities. The camp of El Salvador continues to be inhabited. It is the last company town, mining company town of Codelco that is still running. 50 years after its construction, El Salvador is a complex settlement with 15,000 inhabitants, 6,000 houses, urban facilities, and infrastructure to be considered a city in its own right, making it possible to discuss the purely functional and industrial status of this settlement. Here in the main picture, we can see the company town perfectly settled in the middle of the southern hills of the Atacama Desert. The other pictures shows us some views of the camp here, and the main school here, and the plan of the two-story houses. New copper mining settlements. During the last decade of the 20th century, new development took place. The copper companies investing in Chile during the 90s implemented a strategy of disaggregation of the company town. The notion of company was now linked to the industrial elements, infrastructure and transportation, and the concept of town to integrated packages of rooms and facilities, villa and hotel. The housing for the families of the employees were now located in the major city of the mining regions, Iquique, Antofagasta. Consistent with these decisions, the mining companies adopted a special system of work shifts. This decision formed the basis of new mining strategies, including the construction of San Lorenzo Mining Village and El Pabellón del Inca Mining Hotel. Villa San Lorenzo Copper Mining Village. Villa San Lorenzo was founded in 1995 by Minera Escondida. It's an international Australian-based enterprise. The project for San Lorenzo reformulated the mining camp with the proposal of a mining village as a fresh alternative to traditional camps. The mining village is intended just for employees following flexible work shift systems. No houses were built, only rooms for the employees without their families. The mining village consisted in an ensemble of 6 blocks of rooms, each of 50 by 50 meters, located along a volume with offices and facilities. As we can see in the picture, Here we can see the 6 blocks around the line axis of facilities. One of the blocks here has only rooms and bathrooms that form a block. We can see an aerial view here of the settlement. At the right, we can see the model of the project with the 6 units and blocks and the facility axis here. The other pictures show different aspects of the villa, its image in the middle of the Atacama Desert here, and an example of the facilities as the swimming pool here. Some other views of the blocks, and here is the port of Caleta Coloso at the Pacific Ocean. Pabellón del Inca Copper Mining Hotel. Pabellón del Inca was founded in 1999 by Minera Coyahuasi. The Pabellón del Inca was developed following the concept of a mining hotel, with an integrated set of pavilions displayed with formal and material autonomy at the Coposa Salar. The hotel concept is linked to the world shift system, as the other example, your case. It uses the quality standards associated with an hotel and links the hotel concept with the mining tasks. An efficient architecture with a total surface of 35,000 square meters was designed to adjust the current labor relationship in the mining environment with the recreation and relaxation time. The company adopted high spatial and operational standards, creating a comfortable indoor environment for the diesel conditions at 3,800 meters above sea level. Well, we can see here at the Coposa Salar, the hotel. We can see some wings, they call wings, these parts of the hotel. We can see the wings with just rooms and bathrooms. At the right side, we can see the hotel at the Coposa Salar at the bottom of the Inca Hill. Oops, sorry. Here. This is the Inca Hill, Coposa Salar, and the Pabellón del Inca here. The other pictures show different aspects of the space of a pavilion with an interior garden here, made out of wood. At the bottom right image, we can see the montage of the prefabrication modules here. They just prefabricate the modules at a factory. They just transport them and mounted them just in the site. Here we change to another industry, the nitrate industry with Maria Elena Nitrate Mining Company Town. Maria Elena was founded in 1926 by the Anglo-Chilean Consolidated Nitrate Corporation, owned by the Guggenheim brothers, as in the case of Chuquicamata. The processing plant was designed by the engineer Kaplan Smith, adapting some elements from the Chuquicamata copper plant. It operates at low cost, benefits low-grade material, and continues to produce nitrates today, including iodine and other industrial chemicals. The urban project has systematized the functional diversification of the settlement, including industrial area here, at the top of the slide, separated by the railways line, workers' camp here, technical staff camp, this part, and urban facilities situated around the square, just in the middle of the composition. You can see the octagonal layout they designed for this company town with the diagonals focusing in the main square. Maria Elena was designed for a maximum of 10,000 inhabitants with facilities including theater, commerce, church, hospital, schools, restaurants, sports area, train station. Key aspect of the exploitation of nitrates converge in Maria Elena: the structuring of the productive territory, the building of a new company town, the development of transportation, particularly the railroad, and the establishment of a shipping port at the city of Tocopilla. Here we can see the Maria Elena company town just in the middle of the Atacama Desert near the Pampa of Mirage. Here at the left side, we can see an aerial view of the camp. The other pictures show a view of the street here, the market, and the theater. The mining territory. The concept represents the idea of 3 Chilean regions that were put into motion by the joint efforts of industrial mining, human settlements, communication, and transportation infrastructures. The mining settlements, company towns, mining villages, and mining hotels were slowly integrated into this regional system that structured the productive elements at the regional level. As a consequence, a new organization has born, the mining territory, which is supported by networks and specific nodes of industrial operations integrated to the ports and surrounding towns. They grew in size, population, and commercial activities, along with the new infrastructures, and led to the creation of some major development nodes in the northern of Chile. The area of influence of these mining territories includes the region of Tarapacá, Antofagasta, and Atacama in the Capricorn axis, which cover the width of northern Chile in one complex design from the Andes Mountains to the Pacific Ocean. The area shown in the picture included the 3 main regions of Chile, Tarapacá, Antofagasta, and Atacama, an area of great economic development with their main nodes and networks. It appears the Loa River here, that is the longest in Chile, just crossing the Atacama Desert. It's not the most important of Chile, but the longest in Chile, in the middle of the desert. Coyahuasi, located in the Tarapacá region, here is the Coyahuasi mining, is linked with the city and port of Iquique, here, the port of Punta Patache, here, and the border town and pass of Ollahue in Los Andes, here. The region of Antofagasta, the other one, features the Chuquicamata mine, here, Calama, 10 miles away, which is associated with the city of Calama, as we say, here in the Loa River, and the ports of Antofagasta and Mejillones. Minera Escondida, here, is linked to the city and port of Antofagasta and the port of Caleta Coloso, here. The nitrate company town of Maria Elena, here, is located to the city and port of, is connected to the city and port of Tocopilla, here. All of these operations, in turn, are related to the mountain pass of Jama, here. The mining settlement of El Salvador, located in the Atacama region, is connected to the city of Copiapó, the ports of Barquitos and Caldera, and the mountain pass of San Francisco here. IIRSA and the Capricorn axis. The infrastructural network starts in the Atlantic Ocean with 4 Brazilian ports, Curitiba, Florianópolis, Porto Alegre, and Rio Grande. Goes through Argentina, Paraguay, and Bolivia, and arrives to the Chilean ports of Iquique, Antofagasta, and Caldera, consolidating its bioceanic status. Conclusions. The company town was a model of settlement that served the interests of mining companies in both the nitrate and copper industries. The model evolved from its traditional form based on the integral addition of industry, housing, and urban facilities to the new concept of mining village and hotel as forms of complex architecture, including rooms and facilities. This concept, driven by private mining companies and later adopted by the state-owned enterprise Codelco, introduces new systems of work, promotes a more active role of the territory, and introduces technology changes and new form of business organization. The mining territory that arises with this process articulates industry, human settlements, transport and communication infrastructures, towns, and shipping ports. Because all these elements are interdependent with one another, they establish northern Chile as a major industrial and mining area, supported by urban centers, mining settlements, and communication networks, which consolidate the areas of influence of the Capricorn axis at the IIRSA initiative. The expected results. The IIRSA Capricorn axis will make intensive use of the infrastructure of the mining territories, connecting the resources to major cities and ports of the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, facilitating regional and global trade, creating chains of production connected to the international markets, improving the intra-regional trade, and increasing competitiveness in major global markets. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you, Eugenio. Our next speaker is Martín Cobas. Martín is a graduate of the School of Architecture of the Universidad de la República in Uruguay. And he also holds a Master in Design in Theory and History of Architecture from the Harvard University Graduate School of Design. He is currently Professor of Design and Theory of Contemporary Architecture in Uruguay, and he is co-founder of the studio Fábrica de Paisaje. Martín.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Felipe and Ana Maria and Victor and all the organizers for the invitation. Okay, I guess this is a pointer, right? These Dieste will not be, I'm afraid, a fitting tribute to Dieste's work. It will rather be a kind of speculation on some of his ideas and thoughts, and it will try to open up some questions derived from his thoughts and works. But I think his work, it's worth seeing and studying as a body of work in itself. I don't know, I think you didn't have the time to read this. Engineering is necessarily typological. Archive Nordenson in Constellations, an introduction to 7 structural engineers, the Felix Candela lectures. It was a series of lectures held at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. This is probably the biggest Dieste ever. The transition from type to field, and particularly from type to urban infrastructure, which is in the context of this study a special kind of field, can be traced back to 2 essays by Sten Allen, From Object to Field, Field Conditions in Architecture and Urbanism, and Infrastructural Urbanism, a joint attempt to redefine the notion of field as the material and political arena of the contemporary urban space in lieu of the modern grid or postmodern collage. I quote, "Infrastructures allow detailed design of typical elements or repetitive structures, facilitating an architectural approach to urbanism," end of quote, asks Allen. At work here are those objects and types in this study that are yet to be fielded, along with the nature of this displacement and its transitional genesis. One of the 7 structural engineers considered in the Felix Candela lectures was the Uruguayan Eladio Dieste. Dieste was born in Artigas in the north of Uruguay in 1917 and died in Montevideo in 2000. He was trained as a structural engineer in the School of Engineering of the University of the Republic in Montevideo, where he taught mathematics and mechanics. He developed innovative techniques in masonry construction, most notably the pre-stressing of brickwork and the use of movable formworks. And Dieste built more than 127 works and 1 million square meters in Brazil, in Uruguay, Brazil, and Argentina. Among them, sport facilities, storehouses, silos, and other industrial facilities, 2 very well-known churches, and his own private residence. Among other texts, he published the essays Architecture and Construction, The Awareness of Form, and Art People Technocracy. He had 11 children and was a man of religion with a strong Jesuit tradition that molded many of his aesthetic and social concerns. He was a keen reader of Dickens, Kipling, and Chesterton, and an enthusiastic listener of Bach and Beethoven. Dieste was first published internationally in the early 60s by L'Architecture d'aujourd'hui in 1961, Architectural Review in 1961 too, and in the US by Progressive Architecture in 1962. And this was the work that was published in this publications, the Church of Christ the Worker in Atlántida, which is a small town near Montevideo. A small book by Juan Pablo Bonta, published in Buenos Aires in 1963, advanced a substantial material for the studies that followed. And Graciela also wrote a very beautiful essay on Dieste's life and work. Oops. Dieste's work was introduced by the American audience by Stanford Anderson and Edward Allen. It was actually Edward Allen who first showed a photograph of Dieste's Church of Christ the Worker in a lecture course here in the East Coast. In an extensive collection of essays and work reviews that focused on what David Billington described as a structural artist. More recently, Dana Miller referred to Bucky Fuller as a scientist artist along the same line of thought. This idea of the structural artist is synthesized in Dieste's motto, and quote, "There is nothing more noble and elegant than resistance through form." By the early 50s, he embarked on a radical criticism of modernity, particularly as codified by the international style, both against the theoretical predominance of the plane and the use of glass and steel. This twofold critique led him to experiment with non-Euclidean geometries, with frequent resonances with today's parametric and morphogenetic design, material performance, and so on and so forth, and reinforced masonry. Masonry was at that time, in the 50s and 60s, a very cheap material in Uruguay. Arguing for the synchronicity of material, form, and structure as the programmatic basis of a socially engaged practice. Influences of the Catalan wall tradition and the work of Gaudí that he knew through the avant-gardist Uruguayan painter Joaquín Torres Garcia are not hard to trace in his work, widely considered as the second revolution in masonry vaulting. Dieste's work then must be considered along the same line or in the tradition of Rafael Guastavino, Eduardo Torroja, Pierluigi Nervi, Heinz Isler, and Felix Candela in an open yet interrelated genealogy. Guastavino, for example, patented a tile that has been used in several buildings here in the East Coast, in the Boston Public Library, and in the Central Terminal in New York. Dieste brought reinforced masonry to a radically new territory by developing a novel set of structural types: self-supporting shells, Gaussian vaults, rolled surfaces, folded planes, and perforated towers. And this is a kind of map of the invention of those structural types. The first one here associated with the design of the Casa Berengueria project by Antonio Bonet in Uruguay. This is a kind of constellation or genealogy of these types. These are Dieste's yet to be fielded structural types. The aim of this work is then to elucidate the invention process and political agenda that led Dieste to operate upon the structural types and the consequent opening up of repetition as a strategy per se. This understanding the deviations of the type, Dieste's well-known churches, so well documented in Anderson's work, as singularities in a program of repetition as locus of efficiency. Therefore, this work is aimed at a twofold objective: the analysis of Dieste's invention process and, concomitantly, the mechanics of transformation of the structural type via repetition into the field, towards the definition of what I will term an infrastructural tectonic field or territorial machine. Here, I would argue, and not in the sheer beauty of his churches, irreproducible as they are, lies Dieste's main legacy. And I will try to go very quickly through the first 4 machines, and then I'll spend some more time with the 5th one, which is the territorial one. The first machine is what I call the inevitable machine. These images and the darkish images that open each section were taken a few weeks ago in the metal working workshop where Dieste built all his machines. And the guy that helped him with all these inventions was Heinz Strive, as a German immigrant that's still alive, a very old man. And he still keeps original drawings by Dieste, like the one we'll see, that one, for example, which is this one. The mechanic trajectory that this work seeks to unravel, both at a theoretical and operational level, begins with the machine what Dieste called the inevitable invention, as the synthesis or copresence between intuition and reason, and the mechanism that articulates the invention of the structural type with its material production. Strictly speaking, a machine is an assemblage of parts that transmit forces and energy one to another in a predetermined manner. More generally, an assemblage, and I quote Bruce Boff here, is any compound in which the parts interact with each other to produce a certain effect. It is fundamentally a mechanism designed to perform a certain operation and to repeat it. Architecture and engineering, of course, deals fundamentally with all kinds of assemblages, tectonic, social, political, in space and time. These are Guastavino's static method, and here Anthony Gaudi's hanging model, which allows for much more complex structures, and finally Dieste's numeric theory, which was, of course, a significant leap forward in this genealogy of masonry construction. As an invention, the machine actualizes a process that was before improbable and eventually critical of a precedent order. Here it recites Dieste method and invention, which is also an ethic and moral imperative meticulously described in his essay La Invención Inevitable, the inevitable invention. Naturally, intuition and reason emerge as a productive force when working at unison, not in a process of homologation, but of productive differentiation. As Edward Allen pointed out, quote, Dieste's mind seemed to move effortlessly from the mathematical to the ethereal, from the mechanical to the philosophical, end of quote. These are some of Dieste's inventions: pneumatic jacks, piling machines, electromechanical jacks, and electromechanical jacks used to raise the movable formworks. Here raising a structure. So the invention and the machine comes as a synthesis of both intuition and reason. The second machine, the diagram machine, But the invention process then requires dialectically a process of stabilization. It's the machine that stabilizes the invention process, thus becoming the diagram for a structural type. The second machine diagram is a theoretical apparatus of repetition. It's possible to establish a direct association between machines and structural types in the Estes work. It's that constellation or that genealogy that I showed in the first section. Therefore, the Estes machine diagram has a tectonic specificity and productivity. However, the type or form is strictly implied in the machine to the point that it cannot escape it. So the machine gives birth and annihilates the form and type at the same time. This is the same piling machine, and we're trying to see it as a diagram rather than as a machine that contains the form or the type that can be produced with it. The essay was not interested in variation or productive differentiation. Neither the machine type nor the machine diagram is capable of producing the type of difference the essay could have aimed at, but rather this kind of difference emerges from the extrinsic or the contextual. Hence the difference between the Estes model of repetition and the potential yet not dominant contemporary one of either oriented transformativity or progressive differentiation is substantial, and it opens up a productive disjunction that must seek to consider both the limitations and yet unexplored potentials of the model of rhythmic repetition. This is the Estes Central Market in Porto Alegre, Brazil, made with the repetition of one Gaussian volt, and this is, of course, probably the well-known Yokohama Maritime Terminal that is, of course, probably the best example of progressive differentiation. I was hesitating about including this slide, but I finally did it. But I think it's interesting to see both things. The third machine, then, is the anatomic machine. This is the structural invention itself, its mechanic anatomy and its precise functional protocol. In the awareness of form, the essay discusses the relation between form, structure, and material as follows, and I will quote. The resistant virtues of the structures that we are searching for depend on their form. It's because of their form that they are stable, not because of an awkward accumulation of matter. This was because part of his criticism to modernity and the international style and the use of planes and glass and steel. And I quote again, the first principle is the consistency of what we build with the laws that govern matter in equilibrium. That's why it's logical that we build a structure to accommodate the stresses that it must resist. This is what nature does in its age-old and extremely subtle process of adapting the form to suit the function. To illustrate this discussion, it's useful to consider the complex structural solution used in the self-supporting shells, especially in the looped pre-stressing steel bars that absorbs the negative bending moments. The biomorphic agency of the solution is extremely eloquent. The plan section of the shell clearly reminds the skeletal structure of the vertebrate. Form, matter, and structure operate synchronically as an assemblage or a machine in itself to achieve efficiency and static autonomy. Case in point is the improbable Seagull, the Barbarian Legere gas station built in 1976. Two counterbalanced wings acting as a cantilever beam. It remained one of the Estes most remarkable structures. And significantly, it was moved to a park and made a real sculpture, probably what David Billington was meaning by the structural artist. The dynamic system of forces and vital processes that are at play in the copresence of form, material, and structure, together with repetition, are at the basis of the Estes program of an economically and socially sound practice. The fourth machine is the tectonic machine. This is probably the well-known DST and the super and over-published DST. But in this sequence, this fourth machine opens up a bifurcation, the architectural momentum of DST's work, where algebra is substituted by geometry and the architectural object emerges as irreproducible. This tectonic machine emerges as expression and surface of the anatomized apparatus. While algebraic logic proceeds by repetition by addition of identical units following the notion of rhythmic repetition, this geometric one is based in the particular, in the special case of form. It's an atypical and exceptional order at work where the taxonomy loses effectiveness. Here, the created bifurcation overrides the structural type. The structure and infill wall are inseparable in the Estes work. The wall is in both a structure and limit, disarticulating one of the canonic syntaxes of modern architecture. All of the Estes structural type could be expressed as surfaces that through particular formal configurations adopt specific structural properties. There is no form but folded surfaces. It's also in that surface where the Estes aesthetic and expressive order is made more evident. This is St. Peter's Church in Durazno, arguably one of the most significant examples of his work. And this is the interior, which is really impressive. Finally, we get to the fifth machine, or the territorial machine. Back to the nature of the mechanic sequence, the Estes ultimate machine, the territorial machine. What happens when the analysis is transposed to the repetition of the type in its towards the infinite theoretical dimension? Or back to where we started, how are these yet to be fielded types actually fielded? The four precedent machines should have helped to articulate a theoretical apparatus to inform this transition, altogether an attempt to articulate the Estes' own principles with a broader theoretical conundrum. The St. Allen in From Object to Field, Field Conditions in Architecture and Urbanism, articulates the concept of field theory with the architectural, considering the capacities of the field to absorb emergent formal conditions. Allen quotes Quinter to announce the open and non-formal condition of the field, and I quote, "The field describes a space of propagation of effects. It contains no matter or material points, rather functions, vectors, and speeds. It describes local relations of difference within fields of celerity, transmission, or carrying points. In a word, what Minkowski called the world." Allen proceeds by analyzing Corbusier's Venice Hospital, and particularly the Cordova Mosque, as a model of architecture produced by, and I quote, "the addition of independent elements combined additively to form an indeterminate whole," end of quote, and where the typological structure is reiterated at a larger scale, while the local relationships remain fixed. Rafael Moneo pointed out that despite the subsequent expansions, the mosque's original structure and substance has remained intact. And the black line represents the original plan of the mosque, and then all the rest of the plan were subsequent additions. The mosque, like most of the Estes work, follows a purely algebraic logic, where structural units, here column, arc, and skylight, are combined one next to the other in a seamless continuum. Repetition minimizes the impact of the unit, for each one is an example of another one and yet another one ad infinitum. Allen poses the question as follows, and quote, "To generalize, a field condition would be any formal or spatial matrix capable of unifying diverse elements while respecting the identity of each. Overall shape and extent are highly fluid and less important than the internal relationships of parts which determine the behavior of the field. Fields work neither through regulating grids nor conventional relationships of axiality, symmetry, or hierarchy. The rules of combination have less to do with the arrangement of distinct and identifiable elements as with the serial aggregation of a large number of relatively small, more or less similar parts. Field conditions are relational and not figural. They are based on interval and measure. Scale matters, field conditions depend on repetition and require a certain expanse to register. Field conditions are bottom-up phenomena, defined not by overarching geometrical schemes, but by intricate local connections. Form matters, but not so much the form of things as the forms between things." End quote. It is this notion of field that is at work in Dieste's infrastructural scale, posing the fundamental distinction between grid and field. While the former is a top-down phenomena, the latter operates as a bottom-up strategy. The field is non-hierarchical and non-directional, and most importantly, inherently expandable. Then, which is the minimum expense to register a field? It was in Brazil where Dieste could reach the infrastructural scale. Brazil proved a fertile ground for his structural innovations. Two of Dieste's major works were built in Porto Alegre and Rio de Janeiro. This is Porto Alegre. This is downtown, the river. And this is the central market, or Mercado Central de Abastecimiento. Excuse me. The Central de Abastecimiento do Rio Grande do Sul, CEASA, Porto Alegre Central Produce Market, was aimed at organizing, both spatially and logistically, the trade of all agricultural products of the metropolitan area by concentrating the transactions between sellers in a strategic area of the city's outskirts. The project, commissioned by the Brazilian Ministry of Agriculture and developed by Dieste with architects Carlos Maximiliano Fachet and Claudio Araujo, was the project started in 1968 and was inaugurated in 1974, and it was never completed. That's the lot, and this is the project. The complex, modeled after Le Hall in Paris, designed by Victor Baltar in 1853, follows the structure of a series of pavilions that define an interior circulation, replicating the urban fabric in an autonomous formal and functional unit. The operational and service areas, including the traders' pavilions, garages, waste treatment plants, administration, recreational services, restaurant, motel, and gas station, followed that simple and functional unit structure, served by a principal access over the main entrance over here, which is a portico very much like the seagull, and the traffic circle, a perimeter line, and two longitudinal avenues. The secondary system serves the traders' pavilion, services, and public programs. The most notable building of the complex is the Growers' Pavilion, whose 77 double curvature vaults with the skylights cover a width of 47 meters with a span of 30 meters and a length of 2,030 meters, totalizing 230 meters, totalizing 13,000 square meters approximately. The building was complete using only one movable formwork. Dieste also worked in the Traders' Pavilion and the vehicular entrance portico. The second project, the Rio de Janeiro Metro Maintenance Hangar, must be considered in relation to the Metro Rio system network, an underground railway system that connects with suburban trains, express and intercity buses, and the railway system. Each day, 600,000 passengers travels by Metro Rio, and it's forecast that with the construction of the Pavuna-Botafogo direct connection, that bypass the hangar, and we'll see it. This is downtown Rio, the Dumont Airport, and this is Avenida Presidente Vargas, and that's the maintenance hangar. Metro Rio headquarters are also in this area. I don't know exactly which is the building. The hangar was commissioned by the Metropolitano de Rio, today Metro Rio. Construction began in 1971 and the work was finalized by 1979. Originally, it was meant to be the general maintenance and technical hub of the metro system, but gradually, with the incorporation of new trains and new technology, it proved to be an obsolete program. The hangar comprises 310 self-carrying walls with longitudinal spans of 20 and 23 meters and courts of 7 meters. This is the court, right? And this is the span. Totalizing a covered surface of approximately 52,000 square meters. Today the hangar is not being used and will likely be demolished. These two photographs were made by Leonardo Finotti, the Brazilian architectural photograph, this one and the next one. At this point, Sten Allen's quote at the beginning of this presentation should have acquired a clearer meaning, and I quote it again. Infrastructures allow detailed design of typical elements or repetitive structures, facilitating an architectural approach to urbanism. Infrastructural design begins with the precise delineation of specific architectural elements within specific limits. In infrastructural urbanism, form matters but more for what it can do than for what it looks like. To some extent, both projects, we could also include here some less impressive projects along the same generative principles, consistently articulate a productive conjunction between the notion of field and that of infrastructural urbanism. What is at work in them is a series of principles rather than prescriptions that put forth the territorial machinery as a resilient system capable of performing efficiently at various levels. Glenio Borer's, for example, analysis of the Growers' Pavilion in Porto Alegre concordantly suggests that despite the structural simplicity and the rhythmic repetition of the solution, the building is highly resilient and admits different configurations and functional protocols. But this field has yet another singularity, its tectonic quality, which is at its nature and origin. The field operates as a performative structure, transferring and reproducing the formal, material, and structural consistency of the type into the field. This process could be expressed in the following propositions. Well, this is the transition from the improbable object or the seagull and the field. The machine, of course, articulates this transition between the type and the field as an apparatus of repetition, and also the machine is in that circle towards the tectonic infrastructural field. This territorial machinery, performing at the infrastructural level, is, I would argue, a productive addition to the analysis of Dieste's work. Nevertheless, it's the looping of these five machines that opens up a rich and complex system, or rather a new machine in itself. It's in the montage of these machinic episodes, adding intuition and reason, structure, form and material, type, repetition and field, where the sequence becomes really productive. It's clear that the fifth machine is not always at work, nor is the fourth one. But the system, also resilient in itself, is capable of substituting one part for the other in an ever-adaptive process. Probably none of Dieste's works do achieve the so-called field condition, but they clearly get close to what it could be called point of fieldness, the moment the unit achieves the minimum expanse to register a field. Once this theoretical point is at work, the fifth machine or territorial machine begins its trajectory. Dieste's idea of the universal, materialized in the tectonic infrastructural field, could be epitomized in what he termed cosmic economy. And I quote, "The things that we build must have something that we could call a cosmic economy, that is, to be in accord with the profound order of the world." Dieste's cosmic economy cannot be accounted for without reference to the influence that the Jesuit tradition exerted upon him. In particular, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin's The Phenomenon of Man and his idea of cosmogenesis. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin was a French Jesuit priest and philosopher also. In his cosmogenesis, he understood the universe as a living host, and he defined the noosphere as the sphere of human thought. This cosmic order moves effortless from the particular and microscopic to the universal, in a seamless continuum in equilibrium that reminds that idea of the field as world. But this profound order also represents an aesthetic problem, expressed in Dieste's awareness of form, where he discovered the architectural dimension of engineering. Therefore, what's at stake here is the idea of infrastructure as a signifying practice. And in the particular case of the infrastructural field, the aesthetic and poetic order that emerge from repetition and contextual difference. For there is no repetition without differentiation. At the beginning of this presentation, I mentioned that Dieste was a keen reader of poetry, Dickens, Chesterton, and Kipling. And for the ones that were here yesterday, as probably if Brazilians are condemned to modernism, Argentinians and Uruguayan are to some extent condemned to Borges or Borgianism or something like that. Jorge Luis Borges, in The Craft of Birth, the Eliot Norton Lectures delivered at Harvard University in 1967, takes a poem by Robert Frost to illustrate the phenomenon of repetition as a signifying recurrence. And he uses this verse to show how the two last verses, of course, mean completely different things, the first one and the second one. This is, of course, a rather depressing way of explaining the idea of differentiation in repetition, but I think it's helpful anyway. The cosmic economy, in its intersection with the tectonic infrastructural field, advances a substantially indistinct understanding of the world, a diagram of immanent heterogeneity and openness derived from its definition through a bottom-up process, where formal singularities, the object qua object, disappear beneath its territorial and political performance. To set forth this fifth machine will eventually lead to a truly ecological infrastructural domain, where infrastructures have to be considered evolutionary systems rather than fixed hierarchical machines imposed over the existing natural landscape. Ideally, infrastructures would evolve in a symbiotic process with landscape, seamlessly integrating the natural and the artificial in a complex system. The infrastructural field should operate as the connective tissue capable of absorbing the dynamics of an ever-changing territory. Here, the utopia of a liberating infrastructure parallels that of the Foucauldian dream of a liberating machine. Here, the question of repetition versus progressive differentiation, as exercised by several contemporary architectural practices, opens up a productive discussion that reassesses Dieste's search for an ontological ethics of the discipline and a yet-to-be constructed ethics of the territory. Well, thank you very much.
Our next speakers are Professors Angelo Bucci and Alexandre Delijakov, and I will introduce Angelo first, and then he will introduce Alexandre. Angelo Bucci is an architect in Sao Paulo who received his training in architecture as well as his master's and his doctoral degree from the University of Sao Paulo. He's an honorary fellow of the American Institute of Architects. He's a founder and principal in charge of SPBR Arquitectos and has been visiting professor in several schools, including MIT, Harvard GST, and UC Berkeley. He has lectured widely on his work and has received numerous awards. Angelo?
Good morning. Thank you so much, Anita. Thank you very much to Raul Meorta, Felipe Correa, and Ana Maria Duran for this invitation. It's a 2 years invitation. No? 2 years in Brazil is really a long term, almost eternity. Yeah. And also thank you to Victor that was managing all the mails and to make it possible. Well, my proposal here mostly is to introduce Alexandre Delijakov, because the idea is when I received this invitation, I thought that we had to have a plan to keep working for 2 years. I mean, to keep working in the university, and this is, and of course that the invitation brought several ideas to my mind, and so I could show as some precedent, because the idea of this group, I think that is like to make a centenary dream come true, no? Because this idea of to have Latin America working, I don't know if the word integration would be the best one, but I mean to have the whole South America working in a collaborative way, it's I think that it was dreamed by our countries all the time. And just to provide you some images of this dream, this is a project not very well known, made by the architect Paulo Mendes da Rocha. It is a city on Tietê River that we are going to see later some of his sketches, and how the city is placed in the whole state, and the whole extension of the Tietê River is the same river of São Paulo City. This is another sketch is interesting for us. This was designed by the father of the architect, the same name, the engineer Paulo Mendes da Rocha, who had the idea to make the connection between the Paraná. Paraná is Plata, La Plata, the river, the same river in Buenos Aires, in Uruguay, in Paraguay, you know, it's but the connection between the Paraná Basin and the Amazonic Basin. So this is a very, this project is more than 50 years old, no, that we never built like. But, and how we had to do to make this connection, and, well, this is our architecture school. You know, we have several precedent, but I think that one word that came to my mind when I read the topic of this meeting is the word imagineering, because, you know, I think that based on the new paradigm, our role as architect is to produce and show new, valid, and health, I mean health in a psychoanalyst way, images in order to support present dreams for an upcoming world. Architecture has this role I think it sounds more profound and important specificity. To enlarge our field of possibilities to imagine images like infrastructure for imagination. Now, I made an assumption about how our school could act as a network focusing on each specific site. So, contrasting the historic legacy, whose tendency is to impose hegemony over local characteristics, the present goal is to balance a general approach, integration, and specificity of each site, places, in a way that both can mutually enhance it. And so I thought that in our school we have some limits. No, I mean the kind of work that we can do in a studio is always limited to one single semester. So how we can make it continuous as a work that could go for at least 2 years. So it is very important to us to combine the studios, the research in the laboratory, and these labs could also work in an extension to develop some project as a real thing. So, and that what I think that this invitation could play a very important role in our reality there in São Paulo, because it means a kind of validity to our lab to receive funds from the institution there in Brazil who had this goal. No, I think that could be very, very helpful if we all are linked, and so this is the thing that I was considering. And I also am proposing that our focus is our on-site, to have, this is São Paulo City, and I mean, I would say that in South America, the East-West movement has the meaning of the reverse logic, the way for overcoming our two founding precedents, that the Andes as the geographic barrier and the Treaty of Tordesillas as the colonial border. So it's very significant for us if we look in the east-west direction. So Santos, Antofagasta, all these projects are very, the bioceanic connection. But I think that we can do that looking very specifically to our own place. And what are you going to focus in São Paulo? To those subjects, I would say that we should focus to those subjects which our eyes were not trained to see, those issues which were historically neglected, those which were disregarded and refused by the hegemony, those which were made invisible by the social prejudice. It will be a gaze on issues such as dredging, sediment, sludge, garbage, rubbish, and because it joins all these, it will be a gaze on the rivers of São Paulo, aiming to overcome historical blindness and disasters. So, the guy who I invited to come here with me, Alexandre Dalejaikov, is, you're going to see, the work, of course, that I took part, but a very small part in his thinking. And this is to show you more or less how we thought about take part in this group. So, please, Alexandre. And we have the privilege to have Zoller Lima as a translator for Alexandre ideas, please. Come on. I forgot one thing that's very important, just to And the Santos Antofagasta doesn't matter. This is an Alexandre drawing, doesn't matter. But this, I just to introduce a little bit more this guy. This is a map of São Paulo, and those numbers were some years ago because he worked as an architect in the town, in São Paulo city. And those are schools that were built in the outskirts of São Paulo city, I mean in the poorest area in São Paulo. It's much more than schools because this project were made as a center, is a public facility, like to provide citizenship to those people. No, it means theater, libraries, internet access, orchestras in each one of these buildings. So just to allow you to understand a little bit more the drawings by Alexandre.
Can you hear me?
Okay. Bom dia. Eu peço desculpas em apresentar em português aqui. Agradeço Zé Euler Lima, o professor Zé Euler Lima, por me ajudar na tradução. Eu queria começar agradecendo ao grande amigo de muito tempo, Ângelo Bucci, pelo convite, o Felipe Correa, Ana Maria Duran, o Vitor, o GSD, Harvard e a Fundação Rockefeller por possibilitar esse encontro, e também a Faculdade de Arquitetura e Urbanismo da Universidade de São Paulo, que viabilizou também esse encontro nosso.
Good morning. Excuse me for my Portuguese, and thank you to the organizers of the event, for Angela Bucci's invitation, for Felipe's and Ana Maria's and GST Rockefeller Foundation for allowing this meeting to happen, and also to the School of Architecture at the University of São Paulo for the funding. And
eu vou dar uma notícia muito rápida de um estudo que está acontecendo agora em São Paulo, dentro da Faculdade de Arquitetura. É um trabalho que nós podemos interpretar como um trabalho de extensão articulado com o governo do Estado de São Paulo, especificamente com o Escritório Público de Projetos, que é o Departamento Hidroviário da Secretaria de Logística e Transportes do Governo do Estado de São Paulo.
I'm just going to give you a quick presentation about the study that is currently being developed at the School of Architecture at the University of São Paulo, which is a research in partnership with public institutions such as the Department of Riverways and the Logistics of the State of São Paulo.
O que nós estamos fazendo é a articulação arquitetônica e urbanística da implementação da rede hidroviária da metrópole de São Paulo.
What we're doing is to articulate the urban and architecture dimension for the design of the river highways and the metropolitan region of São Paulo.
Ou seja, são as bases conceituais de exposição dos motivos que justificam os estudos de pré-viabilidade técnica, econômica e ambiental da implementação desse projeto.
So these are the conceptual basis and the motivations for the understanding and the presentation of feasibility, economic and environmental feasibility of this project.
Nós vamos mostrar agora para vocês algumas perspectivas de benefícios diretos e indiretos da implementação de transformar nossos rios, que hoje são canais de esgoto a céu aberto, novamente numa espinha dorsal, numa máquina hidráulica de recuperação da orla fluvial urbana.
So what we're going to show a few slides of the direct and indirect benefits of transforming what now is an open sewage system, which are the São Paulo rivers, into a hydraulic machine.
Enquanto máquina hidráulica, os rios da metrópole de São Paulo não são mais natureza. Há muito tempo são construções artificiais, dispositivos de vasos comunicantes que têm o objetivo de controlar aquilo que a natureza tem de normal, que são as cheias.
So the São Paulo metropolitan rivers are no longer nature. They have been transformed into artificially built canals to control something that is natural, which is the flooding process.
O nosso laboratório de hidráulica, fundado ano que vem, vai fazer 120 anos, da Universidade de São Paulo, foi montado com este objetivo.
The hydraulics laboratory that was created 120 years ago at the University of São Paulo was actually created in order to to assess these problems.
E fracassou até hoje.
And it has failed since then.
Porque o problema não é técnico. O problema dos rios urbanos não trata-se de um problema técnico, um problema de hidráulica. É um problema social.
And the system has failed not because the problem with rivers is not a technical one, it is actually a social problem.
Eu acho que dá para a gente imaginar as possibilidades para a América do Sul, quando a gente imagina que esse fracasso dos últimos 120 anos está por conta de uma incompreensão do embate que nós temos por conta de um urbanismo extremamente mercantilista e um urbanismo extremamente rodoviarista.
I believe that these problems in South America, and which is exemplified by the 120-year failure, has to do with the lack of understanding that is due to a kind of urbanism that is both commodified as well as very much based on transportation systems.
Que deixou para trás praticamente as outras modalidades de transporte, como a rede ferroviária ou a rede hidroviária, e optou só por um modo de transporte, que é o rodoviário.
Because it left behind other forms of transportation, such as railways, and opted for a road system.
Evidentemente, a lógica mercantil e rodoviarista ocupou o leito maior dos rios na cidade de São Paulo e, na verdade, o leito maior de todos os rios das cidades brasileiras.
So, actually, this commodifying and transportation system has actually occupied many of the riverbeds in São Paulo, but also in the rest of Brazilian cities.
A ideia da FAO, do laboratório, é realmente procurar transportar dentro do rio, que hoje é um canal de esgoto a céu aberto, cargas públicas urbanas.
So the lab at the University of São Paulo has the idea to attempt to transform this open sewage system, which is the rivers, into a public freight urban river transportation system.
Para, na verdade, tentar reduzir a frota cotidiana de 7 milhões de veículos que circulam na metrópole.
The goal is to reduce a fleet of 7 million vehicles that currently circulate in the city and the metropolitan region daily.
São Paulo tem 20 milhões de habitantes, o equivalente a uma Holanda ou duas Portugal, né? País Portugal. Metrópole, né?
The metropolitan area of São Paulo has 20 million inhabitants, which corresponds to Holland, the Netherlands, or 2 times as many people as Portugal.
E vejam a inconsequência automobilística, né?
So you can see the lack of thought about the transportation system.
O rio Tietê, este rio que está na foto, é o rio que, como o Ângelo falou muito bem, ultrapassou o Tratado de Tordesilhas. É um rio que corre para o interior. Ele nasce a 50 quilômetros do Oceano Atlântico, a 700 metros de altura, 800 metros de altura, mas corre em direção ao interior. Deveria chegar em Montevidéu, mas infelizmente a barragem de Itaipu não tem inclusa.
Tietê River, which is the one that is on the picture, is very important because, as Angelo Bucci pointed out, it has gone beyond the Tordesillas Treaty, and its source is 50 kilometers away from the ocean. But instead of moving towards the ocean, it moves to the hinterland of the country because it comes from the height of 600 meters, which is about 800 meters, which is about 2,400 feet.
Os portugueses, através dos bandeirantes, seguiram o rumo do Tietê, trocaram de bacia hidrográfica no Mato Grosso, subiram para Porto Velho, desceram o Rio Madeira, em direção de hoje a Manaus, e chegaram em Belém, fazendo um arco de São Paulo, quer dizer, do Oceano Atlântico, São Paulo, um arco rumo ao centro-oeste e norte do Brasil. Ou seja, a conquista do território brasileiro começa em São Paulo, por conta de uma matriz hidráulica, uma condição geográfica.
So the Brazilian territorial expansion of the conquest of Brazil by the Portuguese pioneers, who were called bandeirantes, took place because of this basin condition of the rivers. So the Portuguese pioneers moved from São Paulo to Madeira River, which is on the north, all the way to the Amazon, coming out in the mouth of the Amazon River in a city called Belém. And so he's explaining how this expansion has to do with the river system.
Bem, então, dos outros motivos que viabilizam essa rede hidroviária da metrópole seria também a redução, evidentemente, de poluentes atmosféricos, com a redução da frota de caminhões.
So the other issue about the feasibility of this project would also be to reduce the amount of pollutants that come from vehicular use, such as semi-trucks.
Quando nós falamos de infraestrutura, seja urbana ou territorial, não podemos escapar da condição da perseverança de uma política de Estado. Ou seja, vai muito além de uma política de governo e precisa estar muito articulado com uma política de Estado.
So this kind of infrastructural work depends on the perseverance of government policies, but also on governance, and so the presence of the state to support this kind of project.
O convite que foi feito à FAO propõe para que nós pudéssemos apresentar um cronograma de projetos e obras para os próximos 8 governadores, até 2042.
So when we were invited at the School of Architecture at the University of São Paulo, by the state of São Paulo, we were asked to present a timeline that covers the next 8 governments or 8 governors until 2042.
A coisa mais importante da arquitetura e da arquitetura das infraestruturas é evitar o desastre.
The most important thing about the architecture of infrastructure is to avoid disaster.
A infraestrutura deve ter como meta o encontro, a convivência, a confiança e a construção coletiva.
Mm-hmm. So the use of infrastructure, the building of infrastructure, has to take into account and believe in a social collective production.
Nesses 120 anos de equívoco técnico, de acreditar que a técnica vai resolver a questão da América do Sul, vários exemplos de desastres. Um deles é esse, chamado piscinões, que é uma tentativa de criar espaços, tanques de reserva de água para cheias.
So in 120 years of what we could call the technical mistake, there are many examples of such disasters. And one of them is what you see on the picture called piscinões, which would translate as big swimming pools, which is an attempt to create reservoirs to collect water runoff during flood season.
A outra meta é o aterro zero, evitar aterro sanitário. Até 2042, São Paulo não teria aterro sanitário. Ou seja, a ideia é recuperar, através desse projeto, tudo que é lixo, tudo que é entulho, transformar em matéria-prima e insumos para a produção industrial.
So the other goal of this project is, until 2014, is to keep in mind a zero landfill policy, which also would imply the recovery of garbage, sludge, as raw material for industrial production.
A tendência dos governos que não sabem o que fazer com as cavas de extração de minério ou de portos de areia de extração é preencher essas cavas com lixo.
So oftentimes government don't know what to do with sand pits or extraction fields or quarries, and they end up filling them up with garbage,
Que contamina mais as águas do território sul-americano.
which ends up contaminating the waters of South American river basins even more.
Por exemplo, um lixão, não é um aterro, em cima do leito maior de um rio, de São Paulo.
For example, one of these landfills with garbage in São Paulo.
Ou seja, a ideia é reconstruir ou construir uma qualidade ambiental urbana e a integração dos rios urbanos com a cidade.
So the goal is to build or to rebuild an environmental, quality of these urban rivers.
Qualidade ambiental urbana
Environmental urban quality of these rivers, metropolitan rivers.
Ou seja, a constituição de um eixo estrutural integrado na malha urbana, articulador e gerador da cidade.
So the idea is to create a structural axis that can articulate and generate new spaces in the city.
A criação de uma cultura fluvial, ambiental, urbanística e arquitetônica.
The goal is to create a river culture that is both architectural and urbanistic.
E principalmente, como eu já disse, a cultura de projeto.
And especially, as I said before, a design culture.
Eu já falei, agora há pouco, sobre isso, a localização de São Paulo em relação às três grandes regiões hidrográficas do Brasil.
So, as I just said, the location of São Paulo in relationship to the three major river basins in Brazil.
Das três regiões hidrográficas brasileiras, apenas uma está em território nacional, que é a bacia do Rio São Francisco.
So the only one among these three major river regions or river basins in São Paulo, in Brazil, that is completely in national territory is the San Francisco system.
As outras duas regiões hidrográficas é a Amazonas, que é uma bacia hidrográfica de águas internacionais.
So the other two, for example, the Amazon River system, which is an international system.
E a terceira é a bacia hidrográfica Platina, do Plata, onde está localizado o rio Tietê, que também é água internacional.
The third one, which is the La Plata River river basin, is also an international system, and to which the Tietê River is a part of.
Então, aqui é o Oceano Atlântico, estamos a 30 quilômetros em linha reta, As nascentes do Tietê estão aqui, só que ele corre 1.000 quilômetros para o interior do Brasil.
So here you see the Atlantic Ocean, and actually we are 30 kilometers just away, in a straight line, but it runs 1,000 kilometers until meeting the ocean.
Neste trecho que eu estou iluminando, começa a navegação fluvial regional, em direção a Itaipu.
So this stretch that I'm pointing out is actually where river navigation starts toward Itaipu, which is a water dam.
Esse trecho que eu estou iluminando é uma região de cachoeiras e corredeiras que não dá para navegar.
So this other stretch is actually an area that has several waterfalls that is not navigable.
E aqui a chamada Bacia do Alto Tietê, onde está implantada a metrópole de São Paulo, nós temos a rede hidrográfica do Alto Tietê, que é a base, a matriz do projeto.
So in this location we have what we call the High Tietê Basin, which is where the metropolitan area is located, which is also the basis for our project.
Esse é o limite, da metrópole, da bacia hidrográfica.
These are the borders of the metropolitan area as well as the river basin.
E essa é a proposta da espinha dorsal da rede hidroviária do Alto Tietê, quer dizer, o início, o gatilho de partida é a constituição de um anel hidroviário da bacia do Alto Tietê. Essa é a metrópole, né?
So what you see within the borders is a spine, the major concept that is a trigger for our project, which constitutes a river system ring that associates the region.
Na história da arquitetura hidráulica temos vários exemplos de anéis hidroviários. Paris, Moscou, Lyon, Berlim.
And we see in the history of river systems several cities that have similar systems like Lyon, Paris, and Moscow.
A parte específica do projeto está aqui nesse trecho, que é o trecho de 20 quilômetros. Nós vamos apresentar o projeto para vocês, que faria a ligação no divisor de águas.
So a specific part of the project covers 20 kilometers, which connects a watershed in the metropolitan region.
Acho que esses desenhos são apenas inserções, né? Localização de aeroportos e, enfim, redes de infraestruturas.
So these drawings showed the location of the infrastructure network, like airports and other equipments.
E aqui a rede. O anel, quando construído esses 20 quilômetros de canal artificial, nós teríamos uma navegação circular de 170 quilômetros, incluindo a navegação lacustre desses lagos artificiais que já existem, chegaria a 600 quilômetros de navegação.
So here's the network, the ring, and of artificial canals that would suggest, when it's implemented, 170 kilometers in a circular system. And if we include the lakes beyond the rivers, we would have 600 kilometers that are navigable within the metropolitan area.
O segundo anel é o anel hidroviário menor, esse daqui. É o do rio que foi a origem de São Paulo, o Tamanduateí. Esse segundo anel, num primeiro momento, ele teria a função de máquina hidráulica de regulação das cheias.
So this is a second ring. It's smaller. It's also where the city of São Paulo was born, was founded, and it belongs to Tamanduateí River. And its first goal is to establish a hydraulic machine for the control of floods.
São Paulo foi fundado aqui, entre rios, entre o Tamanduateí e o Anhangabaú, neste ponto que estou iluminando.
São Paulo was founded between these two rivers, Anhangabaú and Tamanduateí, where I'm pointing out.
Esses são os piscinões existentes. Para a nossa exposição de motivos, mostrar a substituição das novos piscinões por esta rede interligada de canais.
So I'm pointing out the presence of all these big swimming pools, which is what he's criticizing, and suggesting that they should be replaced by this system of, or this network created by the ring.
Conceito importante para o transporte fluvial urbano é o transporte fluvial de cargas, não de passageiros.
So an important concept to have in mind is that for river transportation, it should be dedicated to freight and not to passengers.
E nós, da FAO, conceituamos dois tipos de carga, a carga pública e a carga comercial.
And we have conceptualized two different kinds of freights. One we call public freights and the other one commercial freight.
Imagine que todas as cidades da América do Sul têm os mesmos problemas. Problemas com sedimentos de dragagem, lodo das estações de tratamento de esgoto, lixo, entulho e terra. Terra são movimento de terra, material de escavação, tanto de obras públicas quanto de obras particulares.
So imagine that all South American cities have similar problems, such as the removal of sediments, sludge, water, and garbage, as well as residues from earth moves from both public and private construction.
A pergunta é para onde vai toda a terra escavada? Por exemplo, aqui em Boston, soube que foi feito um projeto de túneis, sistemas de túneis, né? A pergunta é para onde vai essa terra? Para onde vai o entulho? São Paulo produz quase 1 quilo por habitante por dia de entulho, quase 1,3 quilos de lixo por habitante por dia em São Paulo. Então, é uma quantidade muito grande. Para onde vai isso?
So the question is, where does all this garbage, this sludge, this sediment goes to? I know that in Boston you have created a system, and I believe it has to do with tunnels. For example, in Sao Paulo there is the residues that are about 1 kilo or 2.2 pounds per person per day, and if you count everything, it's about 3 pounds per person.
Nesta ordem, primeira, segunda, terceira, quarta e quinta, só a primeira carga viabiliza a construção do anel hidroviário.
So, for example, in this first moment, only the first kind of freight, which is a public freight, constitutes the goal of the project.
E a carga comercial posterior, vocês vão entender na exposição de motivos, é transformar, não como uma mágica, mas transformar dentro de um conceito de política nacional de resíduos sólidos, estas cargas públicas. O que são cargas públicas? São as cargas que devem ou deveriam ser gerenciadas pelo poder público de todas as cidades do Brasil e da América do Sul. Estas cargas precisam ser administradas e existe a possibilidade de transformá-las em insumo e matéria-prima para um outro tipo de indústria.
So the question that we are approaching first is the public freight, and in a second moment we will approach the commercial freight. The point is how to transform these residues connected to the government as well as to a national policy for the transformation of solid residues, and that should be managed or administered by the government, and with the goal of transforming them or creating possibilities for transformation as raw materials for another kind of industrial production.
Essa transformação aconteceria em 3 portos de destino destas cargas que circulam dentro da metrópole, que são esses triportos, de triagem, processamento e destinação final. E também de trimodal, hidroviário, ferroviário e rodoviário.
Hang on. So this the transformation of the public freight depends on the creation of these 3 major ports, which I'm calling Triport, which stands as an acronym to 2 things. One is the collection, the transformation, and can you repeat it? Você pode repetir o que é tri?
Triagem, processamento e destinação final, que não é o aterro, né? Okay. Quer dizer, não existe aterro.
So, TRI standing in Portuguese for collection, processing, and destination, but it also means TRI as 3, as a connection between the 3 major connection systems being river, roads, and rail.
Ou seja, uma articulação entre a política de resíduos sólidos e recursos hídricos.
So, it's the articulation between the transportation system as well as the transformation of solid residues.
3 premissas importantes: coleta seletiva, ecologia industrial e logística reversa.
So 3 major concepts: selective collection, repita, por favor.
Ecologia industrial e logística reversa.
So selective collection, industrial ecology, and
logística reversa é o caminho inverso. É quando o lixo, quer dizer, o produto, a embalagem ou o computador que não tem mais função, o produtor tem que ser o responsável em capturar esse lixo e dar uma destinação para ele.
So the last one is what he calls the reversal logistics, which means that the producer of these industrial goods are responsible for taking care of them as discarded elements.
Vocês vão desculpar porque o conteúdo é muito extenso. Como é apenas uma notícia, eu vou passar por umas imagens que eu acho que são mais assim significativas para esse encontro?
Excuse myself, I know this is just a quick presentation, a brief presentation, so I'm going to skip some slides and move to an example.
Aqui nós temos algumas imagens que ilustram, na verdade são obras, né, da inserção urbana. Por exemplo, aqui, vocês estão vendo aqui no sinal, né, a posição, nós estamos subindo o rio. Aqui é o primeiro triporto, que é um porto de triagem, processamento das cargas.
So what you see, these images illustrate the works within the system, and it also shows the urban location of these ports that go upstream. And this is the first one that is responsible for the collection, selection, and processing of these residues.
Isso é projeto, né? Lago artificial, uma dársena, com uma ilha artificial que é o porto.
So here's the design. We have an artificial lake, a wharf, which is part of the port.
Ou seja, nós estamos projetando uma série de canais laterais, canais de derivação, lagos artificiais, para completar essa máquina hidráulica infraestrutural.
So the idea is to create a series, design and build a series of side canals and artificial lakes to complete this transportation system.
Esses dois lagos existem. O da esquerda existe desde 1906 e o da direita desde 1935.
So these two lakes already exist. They are artificial, and the first one to the left is from 1906. The one to the right is 1935.
O da direita foi um arquiteto americano, um engenheiro americano que projetou, Asa Billings, que mudou para São Paulo no final dos anos 20.
Actually, the one to the right was designed and built by an American engineer whose name is Lazar Billings, and he moved to São Paulo in the late 1920s.
Esse lago, que o nome original era o reservatório do Rio Grande, porque o Rio Pinheiros, o nome original na língua geral era Jurubatuba, que significa Rio Grande. Com o falecimento do Billings, passou a se chamar Reservatório Billings.
So the lake that you see used to be called the Rio Grande Reservoir, and it used to be named after Billings, and it's part of the Pinheiros River, with the second river of the basin, and originally called Jurubatuba, which is a native name.
Aqui nós estamos começando a mostrar o que nós estamos chamando de cidade-canal, que é um conceito importante aqui da FAO, que articula infraestrutura urbana, equipamentos públicos e habitação social, ao longo de um eixo navegável.
So what we see here, and what I'm showing is what for us at FAO, the School of Architecture, is really an important concept called the canal city, which articulates infrastructure, public equipments, and social housing along a river.
Nós estamos ultrapassando o divisor de águas, então uma escada de eclusas, como Nova York, Barge Canal, por exemplo, que vai do Rio Hudson aos Grandes Lagos, só que esse aqui sobe e desce. Na verdade, seria como uma ligação Reno-Danúbio.
So what we see here is a way of overcoming the watershed in the metropolitan area with a series of locks like in New York, in the connection between the Hudson River and the Great Lakes. However, this one goes up and down.
Este é, então, o lago de um dos portos de processamento da carga, que está articulado com ferrovia e rodovia.
So here's one of the ports for the processing of these residues, which is connected to road and rail systems.
Nós projetamos também um novo parque fluvial urbano de frente para o porto, ou seja, é uma discussão importantíssima de convivência entre a praia e o cais, o parque e o porto.
So what we see here is an urban river port, and which we're proposing, and which is an important point for the living together or the coexistence between the beach and the pier. Coexistência entre
a praia e o cais, o parque e o porto.
Beach and the pier, the park and the port.
Eu acho que podemos parar por aqui, porque realmente é uma breve notícia e acho que os documentos, os relatórios desse encontro, vocês poderão ver com mais detalhes o projeto.
Well, I'm going to stop here because this is just a brief news, brief presentation, and you'll have all the material available in the proceedings of this conference to talk about.
Felipe Correa, eu acho que vocês podem depois ter os links do site da FAO, da Faculdade de Arquitetura, do nosso grupo, que tem documentos, são textos, né, escritos para consulta.
And Felipe Correa is also going to receive the links that are related to the program that FAO is developing in the School of Architecture, and they will be available through Felipe.
Agradeço, muito obrigado pela atenção.
Okay, so I'll just sit here.
Además, el hecho de usar todo muy bien,
fue intencional.
We need more chairs.
Además, bueno, gran formato.
Sí.
Oh, we can pass those.
Fantástico.
Okay. Thank you to Eugenio, Martin, Angelo, and Alexandre for a fantastic series of presentations. Just to bring in a few points of commonality here, in spite of the vast differences of vast regional differences and scale differences. In fact, there are 3 or 4 themes that come up as that were raised by all of the projects. They all refer in one way or another to the work as some kind of territorial machines, with all that implies in terms of the agency that is expected out of these projects. And we saw them operating at very different scales, from the high desert in Chile to what seemed a very complex and layered work of infrastructure that ties zones of production with the port through a very, very dense city in Sao Paulo. And the second is the issue of resilience of these projects, how they either, and the longevity of them in this territory. And we saw also different degrees, and it would be very interesting to discuss the issue of resilience of these interventions over the long duration, and how they get reinvented and recycled. The fourth is a question of byproducts. All of these industries, in fact, generate either byproducts themselves or are attached to other forms of infrastructures that generate urbanization. And the byproducts themselves can become raw materials to span other other either industrial processes or networks. And we saw that very clearly both in the first and the third presentation. And then finally, to go back to Martin's point of this idea of cosmic economy and how we can expand this concept to really generate a new form of resource extraction that speaks both to territory as to the more abstract laws of economic systems. So to me, those were, in a way, four ideas that I found in all of the projects, represented in very different ways. Questions that I could ask is, can we see this from the other end of things, meaning how does territory inform these projects more specifically? I don't know exactly how I would answer that in the high desert of Chile. It seemed like these enormous machines sort of landed there, and perhaps you can address this. What is the relationship between the spaces that we see there, that we perceive in all of these projects, and how they relate to, in fact, these larger networks. And then I have more specific questions about the recovery and the integration of old infrastructures with new ones. Do you want to begin, Eugenio?
I was thinking to reduce the infrastructural problems to three questions with three words that has a double use. For example, where, when, and how.
W and H.
Yeah, but
and the other one. Yeah. As opposed to who.
Who, maybe.
Who also.
Word. Okay. So, if we think in where, for example, well, there is a big difference between rainforest, São Paulo, and the Amazonas basin, and for example, and the Atacama Desert. Mm-hmm. So it is not the same problem to deal with. Each environment has its own nature and deserves its own solutions. Mm-hmm. The solutions that we were seeing at the example of Sao Paulo cannot be applied at the Atacama Desert and so on.
Of course.
Mm-hmm. If we think in when, for example, it's a matter of time. The discussion, for example, has not been done within our societies. The IIRSA discussion, for example. Mm-hmm. Is it not in our media? Mm-hmm. So when the discussion is done, we're going to be ready for infrastructure, supported by an economical democracy. And how? It depends on the characteristic of each territory. The shorter way between 2 points is not the straight line. It depends on the characteristic of the topography, the attributes of the landscape. The infrastructural form has to include technical and design problems, for example, Dieste. In addition to the characteristic of each territory, its sustainability, the social tissue, the economical forms of production, its ambiental conditions. The São Paulo example is a good example that shows us a specific project of using a river as an infrastructural support of public facilities, transportation, and environmental rescue that is connected to roads and railroad system. So it allows a kind of a complex design of infrastructure. Thank you.
Well, something that seems extraordinary about the São Paulo project is that, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I think it's a rare instance where a major metropolitan area is also the port, the major industrial port on that side of the Atlantic. Is it not? So here we tie huge scales of production with social and environmental layer with social and environmental questions, which is in your case. I wonder what is the intention beyond satisfying the copper or the nitrate industries in terms of more territorial ambitions for Chile. The desert is not inhabitable, I imagine, as it is Sao Paulo. So, are there other agendas that can be addressed or engaged with the development of this infrastructure beyond the copper mining industry itself? I'm thinking here about how it relates to the notion of resilience. When one system ends, meaning copper mining, I don't know whether the deposits are large enough to persist through centuries or whether that in fact will end. Does that in fact disappear, or does it get reinvented into other sets of social, environmental programs like it does in Sao Paulo?
Well, that is a big discussion because company towns have been shut down when the mining deposits ends.
And what happens to them? Nothing.
Just nothing, because for example, all the nitrate settlements that started in the 19th century were just abandoned in the desert. So the desert is plenty of ruins all around, and there is no future for that settlements. Because the desert has not an agricultural support that can or must be kind of a way of more living for those settlements. For example, we are just discussing the future of El Salvador, that round town. It is in the southern Atacama Desert, but there is no more future that the mining future for that city. Has 15 inhabitants, a football stadium, airport, modern houses from the 60s, very well designed and everything. But if the mineral, the mining horizon is finished, there is no future for that city. And that continue happens with all these settlements. So there is an opportunity to build the infrastructure, the networks infrastructure, just to deal with all, for example, the IIRSA the IIRSA project, just to occupy and develop the shipping ports and the towns around the ports, along the Pacific coast. But in the desert, there is no future for those cities.
So the shift from company town to village hotel is important in that it privileges the network, which is considered more permanent than the settlement itself.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Martin?
I'd like to expand a little bit the notion. Expand a little bit the notion of cosmic economy. Probably the biggest paradox of Uruguayan architecture is that the most well-known Uruguayan architect is not an architect, but an engineer. That's something that we have to deal with. And it's kind of hard, but we are trying to learn. But he was neither an architect nor an utopian. So probably the idea of cosmic economies is, of course, not strictly architectural, but it's not also an utopia or a merely utopian thought. It can be explained, I think, from different standpoints. One could be the poetic one. Dieste used to refer to the metaphor of the drop of water reflecting the universe. And I think that idea, which is, of course, linked to his Jesuit tradition and religious beliefs, articulates with the idea of the field as a poetic or significant structure. Probably the drop is to the universe what the type is to that kind of field, which would be the material expression of that cosmic economy. But also from a more pragmatic standpoint, I think that the idea of cosmic economy has to do with his definition of, he called a deep efficiency, which is different to the just financial or economical efficiency. That deep efficiency, I assume, has to do with or integrates social concerns, productive concerns, environmental concerns, and makes that idea of cosmic economy a kind of ecological idea, or probably proto-ecological idea. And another way of seeing this idea of cosmic economy that I think it's helpful is to relate it to the ideas of Buckminster Fuller. I had a whole section on Buckminster Fuller in my presentation that I wisely cut out of it because it would have been extremely long. But Buckminster Fuller famously said, I started with the universe, right? And he was concerned with, of course, physical and metaphysical experience, but many ideas of Fuller's from the 20s and 30s, geodesics, ephemeralization, doing more with less, and Fuller's planetary order that are strikingly similar to those of Dieste. Dieste did not know of Fuller's work. There were no books of Fuller on Dieste's library, and according to his son, he was not interested at all in Fuller's work. But the idea of cosmic economy is very, very similar to some of Fuller's idea. And I believe if Dieste did not sketch that idea of cosmic economy, but I think that if that were the case, those sketches would have been really very, very similar to Buckminster Fuller's drawings of the world as a kind of that sphere of thought and that sphere of ecological understanding of the Earth and the universe. But probably Dieste started the other way around, from the microscopic unit to the universe, as opposed to that idea of Fuller that is of starting with the universe. However, the results are probably, to some extent, similar. Right? And probably my argument of the transition from the type to the field tries to articulate that idea of a cosmic economy with the material culture and material practice, which goes beyond the architectural or the infrastructural per se. Again, Dieste was not an architect, and he acknowledges that even at the beginning of his essay, The Awareness of Form. He understands form from the perspective of an engineer and not as an architect. And that makes, I think, a big difference. Not for the sake of splitting engineering and architecture, of course, but on the contrary, because it articulates a more complex thought and a more articulated idea of material culture and material production. Mm-hmm. So that infrastructural field, probably the ideas that it may reflect of transscalarity, expandability, resilience, are ultimately connected with that notion of cosmic economy, I believe. Mm-hmm. Which is a completely different look to the work of Dieste, that the I would say canonical one that sees Dieste as the phenomenologist or the structural artist or the poetic engineer, right?
Angelo, did you want to address some of these questions?
Well,
your chance to talk. Yes.
Huh?
It's your chance to.
Now, now you ask me about the harbor. Actually, in São Paulo, the commercial harbor is not part of this system, but it is mm-hmm. in another city, but mm-hmm. It's São Paulo, it's Santos. Right. It's of course that the contest in Atacama is completely different, but we could take this many different ways. No, I mean, there is a coincidence. For instance, the most important harbor in Brazil is called Santos. This one in São Paulo is exactly in the same latitude that mm-hmm. Antofagasta. The harbor in Antofagasta is a very specific harbor because the mining copper of Chuquicamata yes. Is the reason for that port. So, in Santos is a more regular commercial port. But if we think about to link both, they are 2,500 kilometers far away in a straight line. Mm-hmm. So this is a project that it doesn't matter what our opinion about, it's going to happen. Because there is a pressure of the commercial relationship to Asia nowadays, and that the Pacific Harbor is going to be transformed in South America. So this, I remember that in 2006, in the fall, well, in the spring semester in 2006, I was invited by Cecilia Puga to teach in Chile, and we did a studio about Santos Antofagasta relationship. We ended up working just in the Atacama Desert, but this is a very interesting studio to work because in a cross section of South America, maybe Equator is a kind of, it summarizes the whole thing, because a cross-section show all the landscape that we have is very interesting. There is if we start in Antofagasta Harbor, you go up about 2,500 meters in the desert. When we cross the Andes, we find a place that is it's a completely preserved place, La Puna, mm-hmm. that is even nowadays exactly like it used to be before the arrival of the Spanish. And though we go down to Paraguay, to No, in a quite desertic zone as well as Chaco, Paraguay, is a quite and after the Pantanal in Brazil, so the Planalto, the Tietê River to arrive in São Paulo, it's a very, very nice trip, and we have railways to make this link. I remember that in 2006, the cost, for sure I will, I can't remember the numbers, but I mean, if I'm not wrong, the cost of remodel, more or less, that was a first assumption. The railway to make the link between the two harbors was about $600 million. So it's nothing. And in the same year, one single bank from Korea would like to put $6 billion to make a new railway. So it's going to happen. I mean, but I think that what is interesting is to take this infrastructure that we inherit to make it work in an opposite way. No, all why we don't have this linking nowadays, because all the connection was from the mines, for instance, to the harbor. Right. So it's just to dredge our countries, but it's not to link. I mean, what was the best way was the faster one, the shorter one, and I think that we should try to make the most widening one too, because this line is an opportunity to develop the countries. So, but I really believe that we can take this inheritance and to make it works for the opposite purpose to which they were conceived for. So, and this, I think that's very interesting. So, if I think about São Paulo City, the rivers, no, the issue that Alexandre showed us, the river was the back of the city. So it sounds like nothing, but for our constructive culture, it means really a lot if you just turn the buildings to not give their backs to the river, no? To make as a park, as some part of the necessary landscape of the city. To me, there are several topics about the Alexandre presentation that I think that are crucial for us. For instance, to take infrastructure as a top of design, I mean, as an architecture topic, or to take the infrastructure as a landscape. I think this could be very, very powerful. Though, to make the river that was the trash, the garbage of the city, something that is the line that is linking the whole metropolitan area of São Paulo, but much more than this. No, the Tietê River is linked with both, or with the Paraguayan guys, and with, it's very, really, really powerful. So, and I think that we could think about the link between Antofagasta and Santos, but this is so obvious. That's not so important as our topic of research. I think that what is more important is try to provide each one of our places with the most significant. I mean, to make our city really meaningful in cultural terms, I mean, and I think that it comes as a result of our work. In the same way that I believe that our identity, it's not a coincidence. It's a matter of work as well. I think that we have to work to make our identity. And it's nice to me to consider that our goal is not to make the whole thing just one, but to be tolerant. I mean, and to be to take the difference in cultural terms as the most rich feature of the South America, for instance, but the whole world. No, I mean to accept more than to suppress.
But I would say yes to that, but also, of course, the line itself matters. The line, what happens in between Santos and Antofagasta, because you just mentioned so many different types of landscape ecosystems, potentially places of.
It's matter.
So the question is, what as in the design disciplines, then do we have new approaches or tools emerging to break down the abstraction of the line in the IIRSA plan to the actual realities of what happens between the ports. Yes.
I think that the idea of infrastructural field that I tried to discuss goes along that idea of that we cannot conceive infrastructure as a series of lines in the territory, but rather as the construction of landscape itself and territory at large. And in that sense, it goes the idea of field instead of line or point. That could be extremely opposite idea. So a field is something that could articulate landscape, urbanism, territory, and cross all the different scales, problematics, and layers of the territory of course, at some point in a theoretical way, but also in a practical way.
Okay. Very good. We should turn this over to questions from the audience now. Jorge.
I just want to make a comment, if you allow me now, because just following what Martin said, because I think it's, I like Martin's presentation very, very much, because I think it gives, again, a kind of vision or a way of looking at problems. And of course, we can't do what Eladio Dieste did. I mean, that technology is also not the one that we are going to. But the thinking, and I do disagree with Martin on something that I think he has to turn around, and it's precisely the comparison with Buckminster Fuller that then applies to, I think, what we're saying now. I think it's totally different, and that's what is. We, or at least I, tend to appreciate much more, now put it in your words, the kind of cosmic economy that is to start from, the unit and from the field, and not from the universe. And I think the idea of joining the 2 points, Santos as Antofagasta, is a little bit of the universe. And I think what you are saying is probably, I think it's the only way in which, we can approach problems like this, is really with a certainty of unity, but comes from an understanding of design, how design works, how you operate in conditions, and how you deal. I think the great thing you added to here is the idea of, the issue of repetition, which is something still very much untreated in architecture and urban design and landscape, how one deals with the accumulation of similar moves. And I think it was very good. It's not a question, but I just wanted to comment.
I do agree with you that that's not the same thing, and Buckminster Fuller's idea, of course, are completely different. But there are some points at which they connect. And it probably, Dieste's was a sort of bottom-up project. Buckminster Fuller's was a top-down project. Yes, of course, yeah. And he was very much concerned with form itself. Yes. And Dieste's structural types were not concerned with form as form per se, rather as a system for a certain specific structural performance. And that's, I think, what makes it easier to move from the type to the field, because it's conceived as a performative structure rather than a form in itself.
The two Gracielas have a microphone, so one and then the other. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to the three presentations. It was extremely interesting, and the comments also. So if I understand, we have learned very interesting lessons, and I will focus more on Angelo and Alexander's presentation because of the scale of what is presented. My neighbor was telling me, well, this is almost like to Ecuador, so we are talking about really big scale issues. So we have learned lessons on infrastructure specificities for design. For example, very interesting, your multimodal analysis, and another point, which is the relation between urbanism and infrastructure on the solidarity of nodes. So this is extremely interesting. It also has implications for landscape design. But there was a point that you said at the beginning of your presentation that is related to governance issues. And I think that one of the goals of SAP is to really talk with constituencies, that is said in the project. Could you tell us how do you envision that? For example, I understood that there is a question of time, for example, when you are asking them the question of time. Okay.
Vou responder em português, Cecília. Graziela. Então, eu acho que se nós pudéssemos interpretar a arquitetura na língua anglo-saxônica, a arte de construir, né? Seria, ao pé da letra, a arte de construir. Eu acho que o projeto de arquitetura de infraestruturas é fundamentalmente uma arte de construir coletiva. É uma construção coletiva que demanda uma construção de um imaginário, de uma infraestrutura de olhares, né? Eu acho que essa questão da articulação entre as escolas de arquitetura da América do Sul, sobretudo do ponto de vista de política pública, política cultural, política educacional, das redes de escolas públicas da América do Sul e também as escolas particulares, tem um grande objetivo de construir o que seria uma visão possível para a reconstrução do que nós temos numa condição de escombros da América do Sul. Felizmente, essa difícil arte... Desculpa, Euler, esqueci. Então, acho que eu queria interpretar, Graziela, que a arquitetura do espaço público e da infraestrutura, a espinha dorsal, é uma difícil arte de construção coletiva que nós precisamos exercitar cotidianamente. E essa articulação com o governo, do ponto de vista de projetos de cultura e extensão, são extremamente saudáveis, porque nas escolas nós geramos os tomadores de decisão, né? A chance é muito grande de, lá na Faculdade de Arquitetura e Urbanismo da USP, ter pelo menos um arquiteto. No meu caso, eu sou um arquiteto funcionário público, né? Eu sou um arquiteto de concursado, mas pode ter um arquiteto, um engenheiro, que pode virar chefe, diretor, secretário, prefeito, ministro. Então, a principal infraestrutura é essa que pressupõe a infraestrutura das mentalidades, que tem como premissa, senão não dá certo nada, que tem como premissa 4 esquinas que eu falei ontem. Uma esquina com uma visão humanista, a segunda social, a terceira pública e a quarta coletiva. Caso contrário, nós vamos estar a serviço da construção do desencontro, da desconfiança, enfim, do desastre, que até hoje nos persegue.
Suler, did you get all that?
Yeah, I think I have it. Well, if we could interpret architecture as the art of building, as is defined in the Anglo-Saxon tradition, I would actually say that it's a collective art of building. It's a collective work. And so what I'm talking about is a network of gazes, of different gazes, and to counter the situation of Latin America and the importance of creating public cultures and such as for public works such as the ones that we have developed in school systems, both private and public. I can't read my letter anymore, but and one of the importance of being connected with the public governments is to avoid the kind of ruins in which South America is currently in place. And he also talked about that this connection between architecture and the public sphere is very important. It's a very difficult art, but we have to cultivate it as architects, because many times in schools of architectures we are educating the future decision makers, and at least one or two people like me, meaning him, will become a public work. Like I'm, for example, an architect, but I'm also a public worker, and I'm eventually an architect or an engineer will become a CEO, will become a mayor, or even a governor or a minister. So it's really, really important for us to assume a position of a connection with the public sphere. And what I really like to stress is the creation of an infrastructure of mentalities based on four counterpoints, which are, for me, humanistic, social, public, and collective, to take us away from the situation of ruins in which Latin America is currently.
Obrigado, perfeito.
Okay. Well, two things. First, about the Tietê and this kind of parallels, because we have very different landscapes, as you have said, but we also have parallels. Naming, for example, the Tietê and the Riachuelo. Sao Paulo is the metropolis, 40 million people. No, 20.
20 milhões, 20.
20. Buenos Aires is 14. No? And the Riachuelo is also the most polluted river in the world, I think. It's dead water. And there have been a lot of projects, similar projects, all along the 20th century, also 19th and 20th century, to recover the river, to make this kind of channels for pleasure and industry altogether in different moments. So this idea, this can be think together, this kind of things. I made 2 or 3 months ago, I made a trip through the Tietê, which is a different landscape, but it's already, they are already making this kind of tourist use of the river, and gives another São Paulo, another city when you look at from the river to the city. This is one thing, the kind of the comparisons we can make to work together. The second, well, yes, there is also had been my subject once, and you have to know that Dieste was the hero of the 2 shores of the River Plate in the 60s and then in the 90s again. So I thought that nobody could say anything more about Dieste, and here comes Martin. It's a wonderful, really, presentation with a new look about Dieste. But I also thought, as Jorge said, that Philo has nothing to do with this, with Dieste, with this cosmovision, because. But well, you said something that is, I think, the nucleus of his thought, which is the economy. But economy is not the global economy, not ciphers, not percentage. It's about human relationships. Well, we know that is economy. And also between human and non-human aspects. Because he respects materials, he respects machines, he takes care of the brick and the functioning of the machines, etc. He formed a group of workers that was everybody was working with following him. He taught these people with these new techniques. And it was not that he spent a lot of money. There is a question in the 50s and 60s in Argentina and Uruguay, which we call, I think, could be translated as substitution of importation.
I don't know in English, but
substitución de importaciones.
Import substitution.
Import substitution. No? So these machines were made by Dieste and the other engineer because they couldn't pay Montañez. No, and the other the German.
Heinz Strebe is the German. Yeah.
They adapted some machines to work in Uruguay.
Yes.
So this is the kind of operation that made Dieste, and I think this is very interesting. And the last thing I want to tell, that is not only the Christian dimension of Dieste and all the poetic dimension, but it's also that at that time, 50s and 60s, was in South America, Argentina, Uruguay, and Brazil, in architecture, were in a kind of dialogue between them. And if you remember Niemeyer, with the kind of use of the organic form, which is totally different the approach of Dieste, but in some way they wanted to find another kind of modernity. And in Argentina, Williams. They're very different between them, but there was the same cultural climate, we can say, in criticizing modernity at that time.
But just a small, but interestingly enough, the project in Porto Alegre was very much criticized because it was neither followed the Carioca tradition nor the Paulista one. So it was right like in between.
It's not about following.
Yes, exactly.
It's about the way our culture is in dialogue, but the interpretation is different.
Yes, completely different.
This is the richness of the
and the multiple
period.
Connections from one side and the other.
Are connections.
Yes, of course.
Octavio, I guess, and then Kelly.
I would like to make a comment to Martin's speech. I think it's very, very interesting and challenging. But something I just didn't understand was the use of the word type. And also the idea of form per se. Because, I don't know, I think type, you're using the word type. Maybe in the sense of element as opposed to part, and maybe form per se as opposed to field. But I think that we should have in mind that form per se, I don't think that this even exists because we have several concepts of form. We can have several concepts of form. So maybe what you are calling form per se is compositional form.
Yes,
and
exactly.
Of course. And maybe instead of saying another kind of form, maybe you should use like the minimalist definition of non-compositional form. And so instead of type, maybe you should, I don't know, it's a suggestion, use the word element as opposed to part, because part relates to whole, to the unity of the whole, the totality. This is very, very important, because I think Graciela was talking yesterday about composition, and those words, they are very, very meaningful. Composition and non-composition, and also, the discussion about reproduction, because if we are talking about territory, we have to talk about reproduction. And so this discussion about composition and non-compositional form, it's very, very important. So maybe it's just about semantics. I don't know.
Yes,
it's a comment.
I think that the distinction I was trying to make was that the essay didn't conceive form in compositional terms, as you said, but rather as a consequence or iterative process with structure and material. So there was not a form or a pre-existing form that then it was associated with a material and a structural solution. Rather, it was a complete sort of loop or coexistence or co-presence of the three of them. And that is, I think, the difference between compositional form and the type of form that the essay would have in mind.
Good. I think we should, Kelly, Shannon's going to ask a question to tip the balance in the room to this side, which is very sort of heavy on that side.
Okay, I just wanted to kind of make a comment about this whole notion of the urbanism component, about settlements. I was quite actually astonished and very pleased with the presentation of the mining settlements. I have a colleague who's doing a whole research about camps, based on the going back to the history of the camps from the Belgian Congo, and was still quite astonished to see that the form of settlements in your country hasn't changed very much, even until the 1990s, looking at company towns for extraction. And I think it's just wondering and questioning, when you look at mining towns still today for copper and for nitrate, wondering if, looking at the new hinterland urbanism, if there isn't some resistance to this extraction, and looking at mining settlements, if we start looking at the presentation, when we look at a new kind of infrastructure, landscape infrastructure, if there isn't a kind of new hybrid settlement structure when we start thinking of extraction sites in terms of settlement structures, if there shouldn't be more experimentation rather than the plopping down of prefab settlement structures for the raping of the landscape. Because I think in terms of our commitment as architects, urbanists, landscape architects, that the kind of taking of the land, which a kind of economy is requiring us to do globally, that in terms of urbanism, there has to be a hybridization of urbanism as well, of hinterland urbanisms and of camps, which is still a horrible word. Okay, now you start to call them hotels, and you had other funny words. I mean, I'm not. Your presentation was fantastic, and I know you're doing incredible research, so it's not about you, because I think your presentation was great. But I just think about this kind of, if we're starting now to talk about the contemporary landscapes of infrastructure and the hybridization, turning backsides of rivers to front sides, if there can't start to be more hybridization also of camps and of not just using now hotels and villas and all these nice words that the companies and Guggenheim brothers once had, but if there can't be more kind of combinations of the settlement structures themselves, because they still look like foreign objects in these landscapes. And once we start running infrastructures across and hybridizing those with landscape, if settlement structures and hybrid or hinterland urbanisms, if they shouldn't start to do the same thing. So I think it's maybe, because your presentation, when you show them on the maps, the ones from the 20s, the 50s, but even the 1990s, there are even more alien spaceships falling down in the desert. So I wonder if there's resistance to this, or if they're not known. I mean, I've never seen these. Your presentation was wonderful, but is there resistance? Are they known, or are they kind of hidden secrets that are happening by these Australian companies or local companies?
I mean, I think in relation to that, I think it's actually, you're posing a fascinating question, but I think in a way through your question, you've tied a lot of the three presentations, because I think you see a transference or a transition from, I think, a model of urbanism that was a utopia deployed, right? I mean, something that fascinates me a lot of these towns that I was reading in the plans is that they all had like a barrio americano, right? It was this foreign idea of urbanity that was sort of supplanted in the desert, versus, I think, a strategy like the last one that we saw, or strategy like the last one we saw, which is more about transformation rather than invention, or a transformation of a territory, or the restructuring of a territory. And I think in those sense, I think your question for me lies on something that Anita raised, which is, what is the future of these towns, right? What can they become once that they're no longer mining towns and a new network is put in place?
Or can they be planned to disappear?
Right, or they just become World Heritage sites like many of them have. What's the menu of options for transformation rather than the creation? Right. Right, of course, yeah, that's the other.